I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with negative body image, depression, and trust issues. My name is Andi. I was born in Salem and grew up in Jefferson, a small farming community just south of Salem. I lived with my parents and my brother, who some would consider the perfect family. My dad worked and my mom stayed at home with my brother and I. My mom was very active in our lives. She's attended all of our school events, brought cupcakes for our birthdays, was den mother for my brother and my bluebird leader. My dad wasn't as involved. He worked a lot, but I knew he loved me and I could always count on him. Growing up, my mom's family lived all within miles of us. My cousins were more like brothers and sisters. My grandma made sure we spent as much time together as possible. Birthdays and holidays were big family events at which all the adults, except for my grandma, would be drinking. It was not uncommon for my grandpa to offer us kids a nip off of his whiskey bottle or for us to pick up someone's beer and drink part of it. This was normal. I didn't know my dad's family very well as they lived in Washington and we only visited them a couple times a year. As a baby, I was baptized in the Catholic Church, but only went when we visited my grandma. I remember occasionally attending Sunday school, but that was the extent of my religious upbringing. I knew God existed, but not much more than that. My childhood was good. We went on summer trips every year, traveling across the United States. We went camping and hunting. We went to the beach, to the snow. I needed nothing, and anything I wanted, I got. To say the least, I was spoiled. When my friends would tell me I was spoiled, I'd just smile and say, yeah, but I'm not rotten. By 13, I was regularly going to keg parties. It wasn't a secret. My parents knew where we would be and what we were doing. I remember my mom saying, if you drink too much, give me a call and I'll come get you. Which, thinking back, it was kind of funny. We would be in places like the ferry landing or someone's farm field where there were no phones and cell phones did not exist then. So I'm not sure how she expected us to call, but she said it every time we left. I started out drinking, but eventually I tried weed. I didn't really like it much. It made me paranoid, so for the most part, I stuck to drinking. I could outdrink the best, and I was proud of that. If someone had a bottle of hard alcohol and offered me a drink, I would take a straight shot. During my freshman year, I started dating a guy, and it wasn't long before we were intimate. Our relationship didn't last long, however. I was into the social life, and he was not. I went back to going to parties, but now I was also sleeping with anyone who was willing. Working the steps, I later discovered this was the beginning of my addiction to male attention and sex. By 14, I had been introduced to cocaine, and I was in love. Shortly after this, crank and meth came into my life. My love affair changed instantly. At 16, I met Rick. He was 23, and my parents weren't having it. For the first time in my life, they told me no, which only made me want to be with him more. Eventually, they changed their minds, thinking at least this the way they would know where I was. For the next 2 years, we spent every weekend together, partying, getting high, and of course, sleeping together. I'm not exactly sure when Rick started hitting me, but at first it was occasional, but before long it was a regular occurrence. I remember thinking it must be my fault, but I couldn't figure out why. But I conformed to doing everything I was told. A few months before I graduated from high school, Rick asked me to marry him, and of course, I said yes. We married 15 days after I graduated. This was in June of 1985. I knew getting married would change everything. We would live happily ever after. All I could see was that perfect life. However, life was anything but that. We moved to Lakeview, Oregon shortly after we married. If you're not aware, Lakeview is in the middle of nowhere. I was hours from home and only had him to depend on. I became a prisoner in my own home. I did what I was told, or I paid dearly. In December, I found out I was pregnant and thought this was going to make everything better. However, in the 7th month of my pregnancy, Rick was diagnosed with cancer. He couldn't work, so we moved back to Jefferson. I was 19 years old, about to have a baby, and my husband had cancer. I was terrified he was going to die, and I would be left alone to raise our child. I began praying. I wasn't sure about it, but I was looking for hope anywhere I could get it, and this was the only thing I could think of doing. As Rick's sickness progressed, so did his anger and his need to control me. I was always trying to cover up black eyes or isolating until they were gone. Things were so bad. I wanted to leave, but I was worried how it would look to others. I remember asking God to please give me a sign, and that is exactly what he did. On August 7th, 1986, our beautiful daughter Shauna was born, and in November we found out Rick's cancer was in remission. Unfortunately, things didn't change. The abuse continued. In March of '89, I discovered I was pregnant. One night after a very violent fight, I tried to leave, but I didn't get far. Rick dragged me back to the house by my hair, and the remainder of the night I sat on the couch with our daughter on my lap while he pointed a loaded rifle at me. He told me I would never leave. As I sat there, the only thing I could think to do was to pray. I asked God to protect my daughter. I stuffed pillows between the two of us while she clung to me. In my heart, I knew those pillows would not protect her, but I was giving it to God. I prayed for his forgiveness for all my wrongs and vowed if we got out of this alive, I was leaving no matter how it looked. Early the next morning, Rick put down the gun and walked out the door without a word. My daughter and I were alive. God had answered my prayers, and I was leaving. Due to the stress, however, I had a miscarriage. The doctor told me he was not surprised, but that didn't make it any easier. Leaving didn't end up being so easy. Rick stalked me for months. He was always in the shadows, always lurking, watching. I continued to live in fear, never knowing when he was going to show up or what he would do when he did. One night as I slept, he came through my bedroom window, glass shattering all over me. Somehow I made it to the other room and the phone. I got the operator, but I didn't think I would be alive by the time help arrived. I truly thought this would be the night I died. Again I prayed. Help came, and he went to jail. Oddly, after this night, he never bothered me again. Years later, I found out that my dad and his friend met up with Rick for a talk. I don't know what they said during that talk, but whatever it was kept him from me. I'm now 22 years old, and I find myself able to go and do whatever I wanted. I had, in a sense, been locked up for the last 4 years, and I was ready to have fun. It wasn't long, and I was out of control. I picked up drinking and using meth like I had never stopped. I spent every minute I wasn't working in the bar. I drank, used meth, and as many men as I could. I wasn't interested in having a relationship with a man, just fun. I told myself never again would a man control me. How wrong I was. I was working, but it didn't take long for me to lose my job due to absences. Shortly after losing my job, my dealer offered me the best job ever. He told me if I started selling for him, I could make a little money and get my stash for free. That's all it took. I started selling. My daughter and I survived off the money I made, and I always had enough to keep me high. I'm now 23, and I no longer had an interest in drinking. Meth and men were my only drugs. Jump forward a few years. It's 1993. I'm 26, sharing a house with my oldest cousin and his son. This is how I met my second husband, Mike. He had come to see Brad, but I liked what I saw. I got him high, and that was all it took. At the time, I smoked meth, but Mike used the needle, and soon he introduced it to me. This completely changed the love I had for the drug. The high magnified more than I thought possible. In April of '94, Mike and I married. I was about 6 weeks pregnant. I continued getting high throughout my pregnancy. I told Mike that the doctors tell you it's okay to continue doing whatever you're used to doing. I told him if I stopped, I would put the baby in danger. I'm not sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. Michael was born 3 weeks early. He was a little smaller than my daughter had been, but he was healthy, so all was well in the world. Except the physical abuse that had started shortly after our marriage ended up sending Mike to prison for 9 months. I worked for a while, supporting the 2 kids and me, but once again found myself getting fired. So I did what I knew, and that was selling to survive. Halloween of 1996, 9 months exactly after Mike got home, our daughter Alexandria was born. Mike questioned if she was his, which increased the abuse, and he really didn't want much to do with her. Less than a year after Alex was born, I was again pregnant. I didn't want another baby. How could I bring another child into this mess? I decided to have an abortion, which was one of the worst decisions I've ever made. After I went through with the abortion, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Our lives continued to spin out of control, and by 1998, Mike was cooking meth in our basement while our kids slept upstairs. The neighbors began questioning our behavior, and our house was raided. Mike was charged with manufacturing, and I got my first charge ever, PCS and child endangerment. Our kids were taken into state custody, however, thankfully given to my parents. Mike took off and went to Washington to avoid going to jail, while I busted my butt doing everything and anything I needed to do to get my kids back. I found out he was having an affair, and I was furious. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I got him to come to Oregon to see the kids, and while we were at our friends in Portland, I notified the police where he was at. He was arrested on outstanding warrants. He read on the computer screen in the police car on the way to jail it was me who set him up, and to say the very least, he was pissed. At his first court hearing, he mouthed for me to come see him, so I did. He sat down at the window and said, "You will pay." He got up and walked out of visiting. After he was in prison, he called me, asking to bring the kids to see him. I was still in love with him, even though he had hurt me, so I went. He put on a good show, convincing me that when he got out, we would be together, work things out. Little did I know, during Mike's time in prison, he was plotting his revenge. He got back together with an ex who worked for DHS Child Welfare, and within months of him paroling, they had custody of Michael and Alex. The day the judge gave him custody, he looked at me and said, "I told you you would pay." It would be 5 years before he would let me see my kids again. My oldest daughter, Shauna, had moved in with my parents and wanted nothing to do with me. I felt I no longer had a reason to live. I didn't care what happened to me. My kids were gone, and my heart hurt so bad. I began spending time with Rusty. He made money by writing checks, buying and selling things. He took care of me and kept me as high as possible. I couldn't bear the pain, so I kept myself numb and ran as hard as I could. We shopped all day and gambled all night. This worked well until Rusty went to prison in 2003, and I was left to care for myself. One thing Rusty did is he never let me write a check, but now he was gone, and I needed to survive. I had watched him for months, and I knew I could do it. Wow, what a rush. Welcome to my new addiction. I was making enough money to survive and keep myself numb, but I was alone, and I craved sex. In my mind, I needed meth and a man to survive. I convinced 2 of my friends to join me, which ended up with me sleeping with both of them. Not only was I getting my fix, but they were also fighting over me, and it was like another drug in itself. One of these men became my 3rd husband. After getting identity theft charges in a couple counties, he and I thought we could escape everything if we moved to Vancouver. Not so much. Donnie ended up in prison in Washington, and I went back to the life as it had been, writing checks, selling meth, and keeping myself numb. Only now I was selling large quantities. As I drove home from visiting one night, I was pulled over, of all things, for driving too slow. The officer asked me if he could search my car, and without even a second thought, I said yes. The first thing he picked up was a container of meth. When he asked me what it was, I just told him. I was sentenced to 34 months in Department of Corrections custody. September 7th, 2006, I went to Coffee Creek Correctional Facility. The day I got there, I knew I was done. I knew this was my chance to make a change. At first, I kept to myself. I stayed on my bunk, read books, and wrote letters. But I began hearing people talk about going to church, and I began contemplating going. I couldn't remember the last time I'd actually been inside of a church. I didn't think going to church would make much of a difference, other than it would get me off of my bunk and away from all the chaos for an hour. But I decided to go. I didn't go regularly, but when I did, I listened to the volunteers talk about forgiveness, among other things. I didn't believe I could be forgiven for all I had done, and I wasn't completely convinced. If there was a God, where had he been, and why would he have allowed my children to be taken from me? I was an addict, but I loved my kids, and in my mind, I had never hurt them. I found I enjoyed going, but I still wasn't convinced. I did, however, begin to pray on a regular basis. The ladies told me God answered prayers, so I was going to give it a try. My DOC counselor offered me a chance to go to a program called STARS. It was a dual diagnosis treatment program. It didn't take anything off of my sentence, but doing it would mean I wouldn't have to do treatment when I got out. Sounded like a win to me, so I agreed to go. I went there thinking I didn't need any of that BS. I would fake it to make it, and I would get through. After all, I was already done. I spent the last 9 months of my sentence in treatments, and lo and behold, before I paroled, I was completely invested in it. I lived, breathed, and preached it. It was like those counselors had been in my head. I could relate to so much, it was unbelievable. In preparation for paroling, my counselor asked me what I wanted to do with my life when I went home. The answer was an easy one. I wanted to help other addicts not get to the place I was before coming to prison. I thought if I could just help one person not go through the hell I went through, my pain would all have been for something. In October of 2008, I paroled. I went to my parents' house with them and my 2 youngest children. My oldest daughter was now living on her own. I was very lucky and had an incredible support system. Within a month, I had a job, and 3 months later, my kids and I moved into our own place. At work, I met Jay, who I enjoyed talking to. We flirted back and forth for a while, and soon he asked me out. This was a whole new experience. Things were different with this relationship. I wanted to get to know him, but I did not want to jump into bed with him. The thought of it actually scared me. We took our time and eventually decided to spend the rest of our lives together. Jay had a daughter named Cheyenne. She joined our family when she was 14 years old. Cheyenne lost her mom when she was 7, so it took some time, but we worked through the kinks and became a family. I would never take the place of her, but she accepted me as her mama. Things in my life were looking good, but I still had this empty feeling. Something clicked and reminded me. I had enjoyed going to church while I was in prison. Maybe that was it. Finding a church that made me feel welcome, however, wasn't as easy as it had been when I was in prison, so I didn't continue going for long. I got a job at an outpatient drug and alcohol treatment center. My dreams were coming true. My children were all back in my lives. My parents were once again proud of me. I had a man who loved me. I had a bonus daughter. I added a bonus daughter to my family, and I had 2 grandsons I adored, and I was helping other addicts. Looking at them, Jesus said, "With people this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Matthew 19:26. After 3 years at that job, I didn't feel like I was helping the way I wanted to, so I got a new job at Bridgeway. This is where I met Angie. There was just something about Angie that made me feel good. Little did I know, but at the time, Angie was the Oregon State representative for Celebrate Recovery inside. One night I overheard Angie talking about going into Coffee Creek Correctional Facility and asked her, "How do I do that? I want to go in." Angie just smiled and she said, "You ask me." Before I knew it, I was approved to go in with her. Honestly, I did not know anything about Celebrate Recovery, but I did know something was telling me this is where I needed to be. I completed my first step study alongside the inmates at Coffee Creek. It was life-changing, and I couldn't believe how freeing it was. I loved going into Coffee Creek, giving hope to the hopeless. Let me be clear, though, this is not the typical order of things in Celebrate Recovery, but it is how my journey got started. Eventually, I was told that to continue going into the prison, I would need to start attending a Celebrate Recovery meeting for myself. So I did, and I found out this too was something I was missing. I actually needed to be working on myself too. Imagine that. I also began attending church at Salem First Naz, and from the moment I walked through the doors, I felt welcome. When COVID hit in March of 2020, everything was shut down, and we were no longer allowed into the prison. It was a hard time, but I had faith we would be back in soon. As we all know, it was not soon. During the closure, my badge expired. Thinking it wasn't a big deal, I reapplied, only to be denied. I was devastated, and my doubts started creeping back in. Why would this happen? Well, this time I prayed, and I turned it over to God. I knew that God had a plan when he led me to Angie and to Celebrate Recovery, and I knew his plan was not complete. On October 5th, 2023, I picked up my new badge and I went back inside. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. Proverbs 3:5-6. Jay and I are no longer together, but I know that our relationship was more about bringing Cheyenne and I together. God knew she was going to need a mama, and he chose me. For I know the plan I have for you, says the Lord. They are for good and not for disaster, to give you a hope and a future, to give you a future and a hope. Jeremiah 29:11. Newcomers, you are going to hear people say forever family. You might question it. If you grew up like me, with a family, you'll probably think, I have a family, I don't need a forever family. And if you grew up without a family, you may be thinking, I don't need a family. I can do this on my own. Well, let me tell you something about this forever family you'll gain. They are like no other family you will ever have. They will be with you during everything. They will be your biggest cheerleaders, support you during the good and the bad, love you and hold you up when you can't do it for yourself. You see, on February 10th, 2023, Cheyenne was rushed in for emergency C-section. According to the nurses, the very moment her daughter Charlotte was removed from her body, Cheyenne's heart stopped beating. They performed CPR on her for over 15 minutes before reviving her. Charlotte was born 8 weeks early without a heartbeat. We do not know how long it took to get Charlotte's heart beating, but I thank God every day for the doctor and nurses who saved her. Cheyenne was life-flighted from Bend to Portland, where it was determined at 26 years old she would need a heart transplant to survive. After spending 23 days in the NICU, Charlotte came home with me, not knowing when or if her mom would ever join us. But on May 5th of 2023, Cheyenne received the most precious gift anyone could ever receive, a heart. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord will personally go ahead of you. He will be with you. He will neither fail you nor abandon you. Deuteronomy 31:8. This was an unbelievably hard time, and there were days I did not think I could keep going. But thankfully, every day, someone from my forever family was there checking on me, supporting me. Looking back at my journey, I must admit that Principle 2 took me the longest to grasp, and today holds the most meaning. Earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to him, and that he has the power to help me recover. In July of 2023, while attending Celebrate Recovery Summit at Saddleback Church in Lake Forest, California, I made a decision to turn my life and my will over to the care of God by getting baptized. Today, I have a new name. My name is forgiven. My name is free, brand new, child of God, created with a purpose. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God. Ephesians 2:8. I have been a member of the TEAM at Salem First Naz. I am co-ministry leader at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility. I'm a sponsor and a certified drug and alcohol counselor who works with adolescents. Yes, I've lost my mind. I have completed 5 step studies and recently completed my first Journey Continues. I am also a member of the Salem First Nazarene Church. My parents and kids continue to be my biggest supporters. I have been blessed with 4 grandsons, 4 granddaughters, and 2 bonus granddaughters. I can't imagine my life without my family. I continue to work on myself daily, and by the grace of God, I have over an 18-year victory over meth, criminality, and promiscuity. Thank you for letting me share.